Okay, welcome. Let's begin here. A couple of announcements. First of all, we're going to be using Excel a lot over the coming class periods, and so just as a general rule, please bring your computer to class until further notice. And you have a big, long gap between now and when the next homework assignment is due. I know you probably can't even believe that you're going to have so much of a break after I've been cracking the whip this hard for so long. But the good news is that so that you don't get too lonely and depressed about not having engineering economy stuff to work on, I'm going to give you the project today. And that way you can start reading over that and thinking through things. So we're going to talk about bonds today, and then I'll give you the course project handout. Ordinarily in a smaller class, a fewer number of students, I would have already graded your exams by now and we'd give those back today. I really like to do like immediate turnaround on the exams, but since we've got kind of a larger group, I wasn't able to finish them all. So far, there are some students who did really well, other students who did less well, but overall, I think things are headed in the right direction. I was a little surprised when the first student finished the exam in only 19 minutes. That was really fast. I mean, it took me longer than that to make the key, and I feel like I know the stuff pretty well. So hopefully that was not just like I give up, I'm leaving kind of a thing. But so we'll go over the exam in more detail on Monday. I'll give you your papers back. We'll look at the key. You'll be able to share your feelings if that's the sort of thing we need to do. All right. Any questions on the announcements before we start talking about bonds? All right. So on the exam, one of the questions was asking about what is an equity finance? What is equity finance? And we've talked about this a little bit before. The broad distinguishing factor between equity financing and a bond financing is that in the case of equity, you obtain an ownership stake in a company. So if they are using outside money in equity finance, what they're doing is they're carving up the company into pieces and they're selling off shares of the company. And what you are buying when you give someone money in a stock exchange, in a stock purchase, is you're buying the right to future revenues. So that's the most common form of equity finance. There is also retained earnings. So when a privately held company that's just maybe a family business uses revenue from their previous projects to initiate a new project, that's also considered equity finance. In contrast, bonds are when you're not getting an ownership stake in a company, but you're simply making an investment. And oftentimes bonds are thought of as being more secure than buying stocks, because in the case of a bond, the bond is usually underwritten by collateral of some sort. So it may be the assets that a company has. It could be, for instance, its real estate, its company, its order book. And so you're getting a fixed, predetermined rate of return on your investment. So that's a little bit more secure than a stock, because in the case of a stock, it's never really sure how much your return is going to be. Stocks do offer dividends, but most younger companies can't say in advance with any accuracy what the dividends are going to be. Whereas a bond investment always includes, as an integral part of that investment, what the yield is going to be, the face value interest rate is going to be over time. So that's one distinguishing factor, is the uncertain return versus a more certain return. The other difference is in the case of stocks, you don't have the same level of security. It isn't backed by the same guarantees of collateral that a bond investment is. And so they say that as you get older, you should shift more of your investments away from stocks and into more secure investments like bonds, CDs, government-backed securities, things like that, because of the factor that as you're getting closer to your retirement age and it's closer to the time when you're going to need that money, it should be less volatile. The returns should be more stabilized, and there should be a lower risk of not getting your money back. Bonds aren't without risk, though, and that's why it's pretty common for bonds to be rated. And you've seen on a previous in-class exercise this idea of AAA rating, which is one interest rate that you'd have to pay to, if you're a company with a really long history and a secure foundation and a proven leadership team, there are these agencies out there that will rate the stability of your company, and the highest rating is usually AAA. And if your company is a little bit less secure with maybe a history of some rocky periods, or maybe you're in an industry that's more volatile, then the rating wouldn't be quite as high. And so individual securities can likewise be rated. And so here's just an illustration of 4 different bonds that were available for purchase some time ago when I went onto a website and was looking to see what the bonds were. You can see that we've got General Electric, and they make all sorts of things, everything from aircraft engines to medical imaging technologies to light bulbs. So General Electric is a big long-term industrial firm with a variety of different income streams. Berkshire Hathaway. Is anybody familiar with Berkshire Hathaway? What do you know about Berkshire?
The investment firm that Warren Buffett runs.
Exactly right. Yeah, Warren Buffett's one of the richest men in the United States. He's just an incredibly successful investor. And so Berkshire Hathaway is considered a really reputable stock with trustworthy investments and secure foundation. This third one, it looks like this is some sort of a bond based out of Germany. Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, something like that. But it looks like this is a federal government bond. So the Federal Republic of Germany, you'll notice that in the case of the Federal Republic of Germany, that bond rate is pretty low, 1.375%. The Germans always pay their bills, and so if you looked up a similar bond based out of Greece, there was a period a few years ago, like in 2009, 2010, 2011, in the news a lot was all about how Greece was on the verge of bankruptcy as a country. And at that time, the Greek bonds had about 25% interest because they had to offer that much of an interest rate to find anyone who was willing to buy something as risky as a Greek bond. And so the interest rate that's being offered by the person selling the bond is kind of an indirect reflection of how risky the bond is. The fact that the Federal Republic of Germany is able to borrow money and pay such a pittance for the pleasure is a pretty good representation that people don't think that Germany's going to default on that bond. Now, actually, none of these companies are too bad. General Electric is deemed pretty safe here at 2.1%, but while we're going through the in-class exercise, I'll try and track down some more notorious offenders for people who are viewed as a little more risky and have higher interest rates that they have to pay in order to attract investments. So one of the ways to find out how much a bond is worth is with the present worth method. And the thing that you should know about bonds is that they're originally sold by the person or the company that issues them. So originally it was the German government or General Electric that sold this bond. And when they originally sold the bond, bonds are generally incremented at $100 per bond. But over time, people may not want to hold on to the bond for the entire term. Like the bond may have a 20-year lifespan, and maybe you need the money that you invested in the bond before the end of the 20 years. And so there's a thriving secondary market where people can buy and sell bonds after that initial issuance by the company or the government. Those bonds can be bought and sold on a secondary market. And so what this in blue here is showing is the current price of these bonds. Even though originally, for example, that Berkshire Hathaway bond was $100 per bond, right now the secondary market is charging $101.13.9 for each bond. So what that means is that something has changed between when the bond was originally issued and now that makes that bond even more valuable than it was originally. And usually what that's a sign of is just that interest rates in society have fallen during the intervening years. And so a bond that's willing to pay 1.5% is more valuable now, because probably if interest rates throughout society are falling, then Berkshire Hathaway can offer even less to get the investments that they're looking for. And this is a complex idea that I know is going to take a while to soak in, but the main thing that you should know is that the initial purchase price is different from what the value of the bond is now. Those are two separate numbers. The face value, or the initial purchase price, is one thing, and the interest that the company has to pay is based on that face value. And so bonds, probably the most common thing is that bonds pay quarterly interest, meaning that every 3 months they send a check out to the people who own their bonds. And the amount of that interest check is just based as a certain percentage of the original purchase price. But what can change is how valuable the bond is over time. And so what we're going to go over in the in-class exercise today is a way that you can find out how valuable a bond is after its initial sale. So this formula, V sub n, tells you the value of the bonds n interest periods prior to redemption. Now, when you have a bond, there's two ways that you're going to get your money back. You're buying something, or you're loaning your money, and the value is going to come back to the bondholder two different ways. The first way that the bondholder is going to get their money, you can see in this formula, there's two parts to the formula. There's this, and then the second part is plus that. Now, without even looking at this terminology, so ignore the terminology for now. Just what you know about these factors, like P/F and P/A. What do these factors tell you about the two ways that an investor is going to get their money back through a bond? What does P/F tell you? Okay, so P/F, exactly as he said, it's find the present based on some future amount. So one of the ways, if you own a bond, one of the ways you're going to get paid is when the bond is finished and retired, they give you a lump sum payment. And most commonly, the lump sum payment they give you is the same amount that you originally bought the bond for. So that's the first part of value, is some amount that's agreed on for the future, and we want to find out, in this case, for this formula, what's the present value of that future payment. Okay, so that's the left side of that equation. Now, what's on the right side of the equation? What does a P/A tell you? You're going to get a periodic amount. Maybe it's every year, maybe it's every quarter. And so you're trying to value what's the present value of all those repeating payments. So those are the two things that go into the value of a bond now. The present value of the redemption price, which is getting your money back, usually, and then the present value of the periodic interest payments. And it's that simple. It looks like it's complicated. It looks like, wow, that's a formula with a lot of moving pieces. There's only two moving pieces. There's the final payment and the periodic payments. And we just want to know, how much is that worth today? And if we consider the interest rates, there's two different interest rates that are happening. One of the interest rates, I, is bond yield rate per period. Now, yield is what you're actually getting out of the bond. And that's different from the bond rate that is nominal, or like the stated face rate of the bond. So remember the case of Berkshire Hathaway. If they're paying 1.5% to their investors, but you paid more than $100 for that bond, then you're not really getting 1.5% return. So if you pay more than the face value, then the actual rate of return that you're getting is less than what Berkshire is paying, because you paid more than the original amount. What we're going to see in the in-class exercise today, when we do this, we're going to try this formula out. What we're going to see is that this person should pay less than the face value if they want to make a higher yield than the face rate of the bond. Okay, so I don't want to say too much more about this. I think it's good to get the practice to digest the problem statement, fill in the blanks, start crunching the numbers here. But once you've solved it, we'll talk about why it's that way. Because it's one thing to be able to substitute numbers into a formula, but it's also really important that you understand the concepts that explain why things are the way they are. Okay, so think of it this way. This bond is going to be purchased on the secondary market. The face value of the bond is $1,000, but the person who's buying it wants to earn more than the stated 6% per year. This is a very greedy person. They think 6% per year isn't enough. They want to earn 8% per year. So the question is, how much should you pay for something that has a face value of $1,000 if you want to make even more than that, the interest rate that the bond itself is paying? And so the answer is you pay less than the face value, and then your yield will be greater than the interest rate that the bond itself is giving out. Okay, so just problem interpretation here. When you have a bond problem, you need to carefully look at how frequently are the interest payments being made. Is it quarterly? Is it monthly? Is it annually? Because that's going to tell you the number of periods before redemption. So 20 periods. R is the bond rate per period. So if it's 6% per year and each year has 2 periods, then that means it's 3% per period. So the same kind of thing for the yield rate per period. And then the statement says that it's redeemable at the face value. So that's a hint that the initial purchase price and then that big lump sum payment at the end are both the same. And that's the most common thing, is that the face value and the redemption price are the same. But there is a category of bonds known as zero coupon bonds, and what they do is they don't give you any periodic payment. It's just all of the return is at the end of the life. So then that's like a single lump sum at the end of the bond rather than having the 2 components. So sometimes C and Z would be different. Okay, so let me ask you this about the bond. If you buy one, how much is the company going to send you a check for every 6 months? What's the amount of that periodic payment?
$3.
You're close. 3% of 1,000. So it's 30. Right, so you own the bond. What you get is $30 every 6 months and then $1,000 in 10 years. That's how you're getting your money back. Essentially, if you paid less than $1,000, then that's how you get more yield than the actual face rate of the bond. So here you can see that the substitutions mean that the overall value now, you should pay $864 for that bond if you want it to yield 8% per year. And then the 2 pieces of value, there's the present value of the interest payments, so 20 payments of $30 each. If you discount all of those payments to the present, their present value is $407. And then if you discount the value of that lump sum, so if a lump sum amount of $1,000, 10 years in the future, where it's compounded twice per year, meaning 20 periods, then the present value of that $1,000 is $456.40. So I know the confusing things about it is the fact that there's two interest rates. But when you understand a little bit more about what those interest rates are and why they're different, then this becomes a lot easier. So the other tricky thing is just sometimes interpreting the text into the variables, trying to figure out what to use for each of these variables. So this is one of those situations where it just comes with practice, being able to solve bond problems. Any questions on this particular example? Yeah.
Converting the interest rate, why is that different than solving for the effective interest rate compounded semi-annually from a nominal interest rate?
So you mean like the yield?
Right.
There is a parallel in the concepts. Yield is a lot like the effective interest rate, whereas the face rate of the bond is kind of like the nominal interest rate. Why isn't it the same? Because when we usually talk about yield, effective interest rate and nominal interest rate, remember that there isn't that lump sum payment at the end. Like in a savings account or a credit card where we're considering the difference between effective interest rate and the nominal interest rate, it's just periodic payments instead of that one single lump sum. So these are kind of two different concepts, although, I mean, there's parallels because the yield is the effect of the face rate, like what you're actually getting, and then also the difference between what you paid for the bond and the lump sum value that you get at the end. Are there other questions? All right. Well, let's talk about the project. The project is worth 9% of the grade this semester, and I feel like that's a pretty good value for you. I mean, if you look at the number of hours you put into homework assignments, and then the overall percentage of your grade that comes from homework assignments, you get more bang for your buck, so to speak, on the project than you do on the homework. Because in the past, when I've given this particular project to students, I think that it's usually taken them on the order of maybe 10 hours, give or take, to solve the project. Now, I have two different projects that I kind of go back and forth between, and I thought maybe I'd give you the pump storage project, but actually I went a different direction. So if you've got the notes that show a picture of a reservoir and some pipes, we're not doing that project. We're doing a different one. And the one that we're going to do, by the way, the deadline for it is Friday, April 19th. We're going to do a project that looks at personal finance. You're early in your careers, and by the way, this is important, so if you're texting or scrolling right now, I'd suggest you set it aside. You're early enough in your careers that if you save $1 now, you're going to have a lot of compounding on that money before you need it at retirement. And so people who really understand the effect of compound interest save as much money as they can when they're young, because it has a huge effect at the end when it's time to withdraw the money. And so I call this project a cash flow diagram for your life. And the thing that you're going to be tracking over your life, or at least your projection of what your life might look like, is how much your assets grow over time. And this is kind of a schematic that will become really familiar to any of you who do like an environmental engineering course. And the idea here is, in the case of environmental engineering, it's mass balance, where you look at the flow into a storage area and the flow out of a storage area, and then the amount of whatever's inside that reactor goes up or goes down depending on whether the in and the out are different. If in and out are the same, then the liquid level stays the same. We can transfer that same idea of mass balance into a financial balance. And so consider after you graduate, when you've got a job, you're going to have income coming in, you're going to have expenses going out, and if your income is larger than your expenses, then your assets will grow over time. And I really hope that your income is greater than your expenses. Too many people spend more money than they've got, or the two will be really close together. And you've probably heard the phrase living paycheck to paycheck, right? People who are living paycheck to paycheck, what that means is that the tank is empty. There's no savings to carry you through a rough patch, like maybe a government shutdown or a temporary loss of your job. But if you got a couple $100,000 in the bank, then you're not so worried if the government shuts down for a week or two, because you can just, even without any income, your expenses will just draw down your savings a little bit, and you've got the breathing room or the buffer that you need. So that's kind of the idea behind cash flow and looking at asset growth over time. But of course, we know that there are extraordinary expenses where maybe 3 or 4 years after graduation you'll get married, and people just spend way too much money on their weddings, right? Or maybe you'll decide you're going to buy a car, and that's a big extraordinary expense that it's not like a regular monthly thing. If you're going to pay cash for a car, it's just like all at once. That would cause a big drop in your asset balance. What are some other extraordinary expenses you can think of that come along in people's lives that it would maybe be a big hit to your savings when it occurs? What is it? Going to Vegas. Medical expenses, all right. Child care, or are you having a child? Yeah. Those things definitely are expensive for sure. Down payment for a house, very good. So these are things that in the project I'm going to ask you to look at your life after you graduate. Think about, now presumably everyone who's in this classroom has an interest in an engineering career, and you probably, one of the factors that brought you into engineering is the employability of your degree after you graduate. You're not in communications, you're not in art. You walk out and find loads of people who really need engineers, and they're going to be anxious to hire you. That's why you put up with all the homework. That's why you're not sitting in the hot tub while all of the English majors are sitting in the hot tub. You're working on your concrete exam or something. That comes from my real life. Can you tell it's a sore spot for me? I lived in an apartment complex when I was an undergraduate. It was like, the apartment complex was like this. This was the building, and in the courtyard was an awesome hot tub, and here was my window. I'd sit there and I'd work on my reinforced concrete each night, and I'd listen to the English majors having a great time in the hot tub. They were laughing and having a ball, but now I'm laughing and having a ball, right? It was worth it. So hopefully it'll be worth it for you, all right? Because you've got some income in mind. How do you find out what your income might be when you graduate? I'm going to ask you in this project to do some research. There's lots of websites, there's articles that are published. You can go and find information on government websites about jobs at the Army Corps of Engineers. When they hire a fresh graduate at pay scale GS9, what is the income for a GS9 that's just earned their bachelor's degree? Or if you're going to work over at Toyota in Eleanor, what do they pay? Well, you could talk to someone at Toyota, or you can sometimes look at postings online. Sometimes job ads will say what the salary is. There are all sorts of websites that tell you the average salary for a certain type of job in a certain position. Like if you're going to be an electrical engineer in Silicon Valley, probably the pay is a little bit different than an electrical engineer in Wayne. Because the cost of living in Silicon Valley is so high, and the cost of Wayne is a lot lower. So in this project, I'm going to ask you to think a little bit into the future. They say, have you ever heard there's a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Has anybody heard about that book before? Some of you have. One of the habits of people who are really effective is that they begin a task with the end in mind. They don't just start something without a clear vision of where they're headed or what they want to achieve. And so if you begin your engineering studies with a vision of what you want at the end, I want this job, this is what I have to know to get this job, and this is why I want that job, you're going to have a lot easier time struggling through the periods of doubt or the semesters where you're really overloaded, or a professor that you don't like and you don't think is qualified and makes bad jokes constantly. So you're going to be able to suffer through all of that if you have a clear vision of what your goals are. And so I'd like you to, in this project, and I'm going to give you a handout that gives a lot of information in the assignment description, you're going to estimate your annual income when you start your career. But of course, most of you are going to graduate like around 2022? 2020? Okay. So some of you are going to graduate soon. Some of you maybe are going to take a little bit longer. But when you graduate, the salary will be something. Let's just say, for sake of argument, $50,000 a year. So you're going to graduate, and it's $50K in year 0 of your career. And then how is that salary going to change over time? Is it just going to be flat? You're going to earn $50,000 until you retire at 45 years into your career? Hopefully not. You're really in trouble. Your purchasing power is going to be shrinking every year if your salary stays flat. So what are the two main, do you know what are the two main reasons why your salary is going to grow over time? Cost of living increase and experience. I heard both of those answers, and those are the two things that it's customary in most places where every year your salary will go up by a couple of percent. The cost of living adjustment, it's sometimes called, or inflation adjustment. So 1 or 2% per year. Even if you never got a promotion, and even if you never got more valuable to the company, your salary would go up a little bit due to that cost of living adjustment. But you are hardworking, articulate, productive people. You'll get your engineering license, and you will become more valuable to the company. So your salary will go up when you get a promotion or when you finally pass the FE exam or whatever. It's going to kind of grow in surges, and then in between those surges, it's going to grow more slowly because of the cost of living adjustments. So that's what I want you to do, is come up with a vision of what your income during your entire career is going to look like. You're also going to do a similar thing about expenses. Now, there's a website out there that tells you the average expenses for a West Virginian is, well, I don't know, $1,800 per month. And I'm not interested in the average expenses for the average person in the state. I'm interested in what are your expenses going to be. So consider your lifestyle and how you prefer to spend money. Maybe some of you are miserly and you're just going to eat beans and rice 7 days a week, never go out, just save, 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 and so your expenses will be really low. Some people have fine tastes in travel, and so think about what are your expenses going to be and how are they going to change over time. And so you're going to have to do a similar graph looking at if this was the income per year. Then you're also going to come up with a similar graph of expenses over time. And so, on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, you'll find out what is rent, what is utilities, what is food, travel, entertainment, that sort of thing. And then you find out every year how much is that. And you start at year 0, you go through however long you're going to work, and then also beyond, because hopefully you're going to have retirement. Retirement, and then over here, death. All right? Now, big news, we're all dying, right? This doesn't end well for any of us, trust me. Okay, so there's working. None of us get out of this alive. There's working, retirement, and then death. And so you're going to have your expenses Maybe your expenses will go up, and then in retirement they're going to really go up because you got that motor home and you're traveling all over the place. So you're going to track through the entirety of your life, income, expenses, extraordinary expenses. You're also going to look at when you have money in the account, it's going to earn some interest, right? So there's also going to be how is there growth of your assets over time. So you're going to make a spreadsheet that looks a little bit like this. I'll give you a chance to look at that spreadsheet while I hand out the assignment description. This is what I hope. Actually, what I want to do, I don't want to leave any money for my kids. I want to write a check the day before I die that bounces the day I die. That's what I want to work so that my total assets are high. I've got enough to have a crazy retirement, and then it just magically works out that it's all gone on the same day that I am. So this is showing, let's look at this person is 23 years old in 2018. They started work. So in your report, you're going to explain to me what assumptions and what research have you got to back up these numbers. So there's going to be a paragraph that goes with each numbered section that I give you in the handout here. So you're going to have a report that section 1 of your report is you're telling me about your income assumptions. You went and did some research on what your starting salary is going to be, and also you tell me, for example, why did this person have a big jump in salary from year 33 to year 34? Because it looks like it was some cost of living stuff, but then it jumped up. Oh, from 34 to 35, there's a big jump there as well. So from 60,000 to 75,000. So basically you're characterizing the original source of your data and some of the assumptions that you're making. Where the real magic happens is there's going to be some rate of return on investments. And so the amount you save every year is going to partly contribute to how much the saving balance grows, but there's also the investment yield on the previous year's balance. So this is a really important point. So let me emphasize this, and set down your phone so that you can pay attention to this one. So your first year, look, you've got $17,000 surplus because you earned 37 and you spent 20. So the difference there is 17,000. So what you're saying in this investment yield amount is you're earning 5.5% on the previous year's balance. And so $935 is the earnings that you have on last year's balance of 17,000. And so then 39,000 is because you have last year's 17,000 plus the amount that came in this year, 21,500, and the investment yield on the previous year's balance. So the people who understand compound interest start saving early because that compounding effect is just nuts. With each additional year, even though you're only saving, look, you only saved an extra 4,000, an extra 2,000, but because of the earnings due to the yield, the net amount is going up $50,000 per year towards the end there. So you're going to make a spreadsheet that looks like this and do some tables, put it into the body text, and just create like a financial plan at the beginning of your career when you have the greatest possibility for making positive changes. So that's the project. I've gone to some detail of what I expect in the handout, and this has evolved from semester to semester, so I really think you've got all the information that you need here. Occasionally I'll get questions where it's clear they haven't yet read the handout, so please make some time. You don't have a homework assignment due for a while, so maybe over the weekend read through the handout, and then if there are questions we can address it in class on Monday. That's all for today, and I will see you next time. We'll go over the exam solution.